Hello, you are watching A News Morning from Baku. I'm Bakhtiar Sanov, and here are the top stories. President Joe Biden's administration allows Ukraine to use U.S. arms to strike inside Russia, source says. The two-day G20 summit kicks off in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Leaders are set to begin discussions on global issues such as poverty and climate change. International Atomic Energy Agency reports mass exchange of electrical substations powering Ukraine's nuclear power plants. President Joe Biden's administration will allow Ukraine to use its weapons for strikes deep into Russian territory. Three sources familiar with the matter told Reuters. This move marks a major policy shift. Ukraine plans its first long-range attack soon, likely with Army tactical missile systems rockets, but details remain confidential. This comes after repeated requests from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and amidst Russia's deployment of North Korean troops, raising alarms in Kiev and Washington. Whilst some doubt it will change the war's trajectory, the decision could strengthen Ukraine's position in potential ceasefire talks. It's unclear if President-elect Donald Trump, critical of U.S. aid to Ukraine, will reverse the policy. The G20 summit, gathering the leaders of the 20 major global economies, starts today in Rio de Janeiro. This two-day event in Brazil is expected to address social inclusion, global governance reform, and energy transitions.
It's all final touches from here as Brazil gears up to host the G20 summit, expecting world leaders. Among them are the US President Joe Biden and China's Xi Jinping. During Monday's opening ceremony, the country is also expected to officially launch the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty. It's an initiative aimed at mobilizing countries in the fight against hunger by 2030. Meanwhile, concerns about the effectiveness of the summit are being voiced by locals, some who claim not to see any change. On Saturday, protesters in Rio de Janeiro sunk giant cutouts of top G20 leaders in Botafogo Bay.
In anticipation of the meeting of the big global leaders at the G20, we are sinking these heads to represent how these leaders, who head some of the biggest economies in the world, are failing to face climate change.
26,000 troops have been deployed around the venue to reinforce security as more protests are expected following the event. The summit will coincide with the second week of the UN Climate Conference held in Azerbaijan. UN officials hope the G20 summit will also provide political momentum for a COP29 deal on climate financing.
UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has urged the G20 to take action on global challenges such as climate change and peace. Speaking in Rio de Janeiro after addressing the COP29 summit in Baku, Guterres warned that 2024 is likely to become the hottest year on record.
The world's strongest countries are being called upon to act now to save the planet. The United Nations chief, Antonio Guterres, says these nations must lead the fight against the climate emergency. He reminded world leaders at the G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro about the devastating drought in the Amazon and the catastrophic floods in Brazil as urgent examples of the escalating crisis.
And I have come to Rio with a simple message. G20 leaders must lead. And G20 countries, by definition, have tremendous economic clout and they yield massive diplomatic leverage. They must use it to tackle key global problems. Climate crisis has burned through another record, with 2024 likely to be the hottest year in history. We see the impacts everywhere and look no further than the drought in the Amazon and horrible floods in southern Brazil.
He also urged peace in conflict zones in Gaza, Ukraine and Sudan, calling for immediate ceasefires and respect for international law.
Everywhere, Peace requires actions grounded in the values of the UN Charter, the rule of law, and the principles of sovereignty, political independence, and territorial integrity of states.
Guterres reminded leaders that while challenges are great, solutions are possible if the world's largest economies lead by example. He concluded, stressing the need to seize every opportunity to drive transformative action for a safer, more peaceful and sustainable world.
During an hour-long call between German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and Russian President Vladimir Putin, their first conversation since 2022, both sides retained their current positions. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz commented on the phone call from Berlin airport before his departure for the G20 summit in Brazil. He said the conversation had given no indication of a shift in the Russian president's thinking on the war in Ukraine.
In this regard, I also held talks with the Russian president, as announced a long time ago. It was important to say that he should not count on the support of Germany, Europe, and many others in the world in persuading Ukraine to reduce its actions, but it is up to him to ensure that the war comes to an end by withdrawing troops from his side. The conversation was very detailed and reiterated that the Russian president's views on the war have not changed much, which is not good news. However, this is precisely why it is so important that we remain clear on the question of principle, namely that Ukraine can rely on us and that this principle continues to apply. There will be no decisions over the heads of the Ukrainians, and many aspects will need to be discussed and renegotiated.
A news correspondent from Moscow, Dasha Chernyshova, has more details on the phone call.
For the first time in almost 2 years, Russian President Vladimir Putin talked to a head of a leading Western nation, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. Moscow described the one-hour phone call as frank and detailed exchange of views over the situation in Ukraine. Scholz urged Russia to show willingness to negotiate with Ukraine with the aim of achieving a just and lasting peace. Putin insisted that Moscow never refused the talks and that any agreement should take Russia's security interests into account. Putin also told the German leader that any agreement should proceed from the new territorial realities and that the root causes of the conflict must be addressed. Scholz stressed that Germany would continue to support Ukraine for as long as needed. The call comes at a time of widespread uncertainty about how the approach of the incoming administration of U.S. President-elect Donald Trump could change the course of the conflict that is approaching a 1,000-day mark. Donald Trump has previously claimed he will be able to end the conflict in Ukraine within a day of taking office. Kyiv's European allies are concerned that the Trump administration will see military and financial support from America to Ukraine fall away. The Kremlin said Germany initiated the call and Ukraine criticized it, saying the call had opened a Pandora's box. Moscow also says that the discussion touched upon Russian-Germany ties, with Putin noting unprecedented decline in all areas. Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow for A News.
Well, he also spoke on the Scholz-Putin call to Anna Wandensky, international journalist and political analyst based in Brussels.
It was a much more an egoistic impulse of Mr. Scholz, German Chancellor, than an attempt to resolve Ukrainian conflict. Because as we understand from both positions, they remain unchanged. The Chancellor repeated the official position, and he is still standing on 10-point Zelensky plan. This is a plan of return of Ukraine to the borders of 1991. So this plan remains unchanged. And of course, he once again called Putin to withdraw all Russian troops from Ukrainian territory, meaning Ukrainian territory in this 1991 borders. If we take his opponent point of view, it also is unchanged. So Russian side also demanded to take into consideration the new realities, meaning this 20% of Ukrainian territory that is under Russian control. And Putin also said that the major reason for the conflict is NATO expansion, and this problem should be resolved because without refusal of NATO to expand further east, there will be no conflict resolution. So we see that the positions remain the same. Olaf Scholz is suffering a tremendous political defeat in Germany. Of course, he is trying to save his reputation, which is impossible to save because it's completely burned. I don't know why some people call him a lame duck, because I think he's already, he looks like a fried geese. You know, his political reputation is buried. So his attempts to make an impression on his electorate is rather wasted, because now already Germans are looking into the future. They are assessing the next chancellor and they're making further plans. So, but it was painful, of course, for President Zelensky, because he thinks that it's in a certain way it breaks this silence, this isolation of Kremlin that was created as a result of Russian invasion. But I think he exaggerated a little bit because the isolation remains largely, and this is a German chancellor that is leaving his position. He's leaving his official job, and that's why we can't really consider that to be a breakthrough, because the breakthrough will be when President Trump will call, when most probably Sir Starmer will call, and of course Macron. So they are the politicians who are active and who are not in the situation of leaving their position and their status. There is no isolation as such. Russia is far too big and far too influential, and let's not forget it's one of the major United Nations member states. So we can't isolate Russia. It's physically impossible. It's juridically impossible. And of course, Russia is very important exporter of oil and gas on world markets, even if Europe says it rejects it, but it couldn't reject it fully, because still European households and European industry needs Russian at least gas, if not oil, because of course oil world markets is very well developed and there are a lot of terminals, so that can be avoided. But still Russia is far too big to stay isolated. It has never been isolated. Of course, there is this animosity from the ensemble of Western countries within the situation of expansion of NATO and Russian opposition to this perspective. But I think that this telephone call will not change a lot in the assessment of Russia, because from one hand, Chancellor Scholz is on the way out. That's inevitable. That's clear. His career, the trajectory of his political career, is in absolute and I would say fatal decline, because Germans are very unhappy with the results of his activities, his political entrepreneurship, if we can say so. And concerning President Zelensky, of course, he's, I would say, very much concerned about the situation, because we hear from President Trump that he's going to end this conflict in 24 hours because he has the other priorities. His priority is the Pacific direction, because he sees that the major competitor in this world, and to some extent even opponent of the United States, is China. So he will pay a lot of attention to this opposition between the United States and China. He needs funds to enforce position of American military in the Pacific. And also, of course, our oil is always in the first ranks, and that's why the Middle East conflict will be also a priority. So the next administration will prioritize the other directions in foreign policy, and that's already clear now. But it's not this telephone call that will change the course of history. There are too many other factors, and of course, the major factor is the idea, the proposal which was made in Bucharest summit of open door to NATO for Ukraine and Georgia. I understand that this can't be abolished because NATO is an open alliance, but still this concept can't be put on ice.
Andrei Baklanov, Vice Chairman of the Association of Russian Diplomats, also shared his views on the subject.
I think that there is only one important issue dealing with this conversation. This is the practical liquidation of the so-called blockade, political and psychological blockade of the Russian leader and the Russian Federation as a whole. So Scholz broke this blockade, he initiated this conversation, and with the conversation was rather long. Well, but I do not think that both sides knew something unexpected. The position is quite clear of the both sides, so it doesn't mean that there will be any further developments after this talk. Yes, we have many people that are reporting us of what the situation in Germany. It's becoming less and less satisfactory, and the level of living is deteriorating. And this can be characterized. This can be characterized as the kind of crisis. So, in these circumstances, Chancellor Scholz has the necessity to do something, or to imitate that he is doing something to liquidate the main source of these difficulties, the lack of the opportunity to go on with the Russian gas coming to the plants and to the houses of Germany. It was the initiative of Germany itself and NATO countries. So I think that what they have now as the results, this negative result, these are the results of their own policy. And maybe what we have now, it's a kind of early attempts to return back to what we can call normality. But it's very early to say that something will conjure up. I think that a quite new situation is appearing in Europe. There are several factors of this new situation. First, this is quite obvious military victory of the Russian troops. We are not in the haste because we are interested in liquidating the military infrastructure of Ukraine. It needs time. It's not the period of 1 and 2 months. So we are interested in liquidating this infrastructure. What we are doing each day by bombardments with our rockets and aircraft. Well, this is a very important military aspect of the situation. And Trump factor is also very important. Under no circumstances, it's quite clear such a personality as a Trump will make any direct military assistance if something will happen on the territory of European countries. For instance, if we will strike the objects through which the transportation is going on the territory of Ukraine. We promised that to do, and it's a very serious factor, and the countries of Europe will be in a very humiliating situation. Process of political transition in the United States of America has already started, the transition. So the president of America today cannot do anything he wants. He is already in certain limits because of the factor of the new elected president. Of course, there can be some unpleasant things. For instance, more financial pledges which this administration will try to do, but no, it will not exceed this the level of financial resources given additionally to Ukraine. Zelensky is a very specific figure. He is not really nationalist of Ukraine. He is by himself. He is just playing the role for money. So he is not a political leader. He is just a traitor which would be taken to court immediately after the liberation of Ukraine. That will be his terrible, terrible destiny. He will not escape somewhere else.
Large-scale Russian attacks have severely damaged electrical substations supporting Ukraine's nuclear power plants. This is according to the latest report from the International Atomic Energy Agency, which visited the sites in September and October.
The latest report from the International Atomic Energy Agency Director General says that Ukraine had to reduce electricity production after Russian strikes on the country's energy infrastructure. The nuclear power plants didn't shut down and were not directly hit, but the damage was to supporting substations. Currently, only 2 of the country's 9 operational reactors are currently running at full capacity. The International Atomic Energy Agency noted it had inspected 7 substations after attacks and will assess whether further site visits are needed following this latest wave.
Turkey has rejected the European Union's maritime special planning maps between Turkey and Greece. It's after a recent update in the European MSP platform. Turkey has rejected new Greek maps of the Eastern Mediterranean, claiming they overlap its territorial waters and wrongly place in the Aegean Sea under Greek jurisdiction. Ankara declared the EU's map null and void, arguing it has no authority over disputes between sovereign states. The EU says the map is a planning tool to manage seas substantially, but Turkey insists it complicates efforts to resolve the ongoing maritime boundary dispute with Greece. The second week of the largest climate conference, COP29, starts today in Baku. Earlier during the parliamentary meeting held as part of COP29, participants focused on addressing the unique vulnerabilities of different countries, including small island states, mountainous nations, and landlocked countries. Parliamentarians highlighted how climate change impacts social sensitivity, particularly among young people. Panel discussions explored the direct and indirect effects of climate change on human health, with a focus on the heightened risks faced by the elderly and children. It was emphasized that beyond the financial support discussed at COP29, investing in stronger healthcare system is vital to addressing these challenges.
For me, the contribution of parliamentarians is to vote on laws in favour of climate change that can help prevent many forms of climate change. This is my wish for the past, to avoid exacerbating climate change. The role of Parliament is also to oversee the government's actions regarding commitments to fight climate change.
Every parliamentarian in here, they would like their best. Everybody is saying what will be finance of this issue. Because for struggling climate change, we need too much effort. It needs much more money. There is a big country such as America and China. These 2 countries is more than 70% of serra gas sent to atmosphere. So everybody waiting. This big country must support the finance. They must give too much finance because the small country needs the finance. That is the main subject.
First of all, parliamentarians have a key role in holding their governments accountable to their nationally determined contributions, the NDCs. So most governments have the ambition to help climate change by committing to lower emissions. Parliamentarians can hold the government accountable to these NDCs, and they can also ensure that the budgets that governments bring to their parliaments finance and also ensure that these commitments are able to be carried out. Parliamentarians have a critical role in holding government accountable, and through the government budgets, they can ensure that energy transitions are financed in the government budget when it comes to Parliament. So I think these two elements are very important, and meetings on the sideline of COP ensure that parliamentarians understand the science and also the process involved through collaboration and sharing with other countries.
Back at COP29, various side events and discussions were held on the negative impacts of the mining industry. These were discussed by eco-activists from Kazakhstan, Mexico and Sweden.
Harmful substances released from mining activities can negatively impact the ecology of neighbouring countries via groundwater transference. That's what Swedish eco-activist Helen Lindmark said during a discussion at COP29 on the environmental impact of Armenia's mining industry on the South Caucasus.
We are facing the same threat that you're facing here. And one thing is that why we see it as a testimony is that we see it in the health issues, both physically and mentally and spiritually we see it. And I think that we have to find other ways of dialogues, other ways to bridge this and to meet each other in that dialogues and talking from a human perspective. What is my responsibility as a human being? How do I want to live and how do I want to interact in this world? And when I look at these conflicts, it's also, I can see them outside of myself.
She added that it's important that countries work together to reduce the effects of the mining industry on the environment as the negative impact is affecting the world. At the Climate Change Summit, delegates looking at ways to strengthen cooperation with international NGOs and develop joint activities.
A News continues live coverage of COP29 being held in Baku, Azerbaijan. The second week of the event starts today, and Guy Sean and Orkan Amashov are live on the scene with the latest. Good morning, Guy and Orkan. Could you update us on what's happening there right now?
Good morning, Batyr. Good morning, everyone. Yes, a very good morning here from COP29. A slight change of focus today. The theme is human development, children, youth and education. And there are some very high-level meetings taking place throughout the day between the COP29 presidency, UNESCO, the World Health Organization, the ILO and UNICEF, all getting together and focusing on how to engage, support and empower younger people to lead the future fight against climate change themselves. Let's now bring in our very own Orkan Amashov. Orkan, we've seen this shift, haven't we, from the high-level politics into the process, and now we're turning to the people.
Yeah, today's focus is environment, of course, the education, social protection, the fate of the vulnerable communities, youth involvement in decision-making process. Yes, today's shift, we have noticed some shift, of course, but informal discussions are taking place. Actually, on my way to the Blue Zone, I met some of the people who were asking me how to get to Blue Zone, because some new people have arrived here in Baku. The Minister of Environment will be here as well. So this week is a crunch week. Decision will be made towards the end of the week. And by the way, yesterday, day 7, wasn't a day off in the real sense of the word, because there were some interesting developments taking place in the Green Zone, one of which was about the women leading the charge, the climate champions met for sustainable development and climate resilient future. Today's focus is going to be on education, on climate crisis, on climate change, and about environmental literacy, which is absolutely key in terms of building climate resilient, low carbon, prosperous, inclusive future. Yes, indeed, the event that you mentioned is currently taking place. At the end of it, the Baku Initiative on Human Development for Climate Resilience and Baku Guiding Principles on Human Development for Climate Resilience will be announced. There will be some other events co-organized by COP29 presidency and some other entities. So today's focus is, of course, education, but I expect to hear more about the developments which should ultimately lead to that NCQG decision, because what I've heard on the grapevine that some very important nitty-gritty technical discussions are currently taking place. By the way, we haven't yet heard about Climate Finance Action Fund, which is one of Azerbaijan COP29 presidency's initiatives. We know that it is a 1 billion fund in the context of which fossil fuel producing nations, including Azerbaijan, are contributing to help some of the developing nations to tackle climate crisis. So probably during the course of this week, we will hear more about that fund as well.
Thank you, Orkan. So we're into the crunch week and we'll be keeping you updated every step of the way here at COP29.
Thank you very much for latest developments. That was A News, Guy Sean and Orkan Amashov. That's all we have for this hour. Please do stay with us. A lot from us here in Baku. We wish you a pleasant day ahead.